Boldwood presents The Silver Ladies Do Lunch, written by Judy Leigh and read by Phillida Nash. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. Who do you think our new teacher will be? Josephine Potter fiddled nervously with her long plaits as she stood by the railings of the red brick primary school beyond the separate entrances marked girls and boys. Not Terrible Thomas again. He caned me on my hands last year. Linda Norton cringed at the memory. He said my handwriting was like a spider, but my nib broke. The inkwell was full of soggy blotting paper and it splashed everywhere. But it really hurt and I couldn't write at all for a whole day. I didn't dare tell Mum, though. It was 1959, the beginning of the autumn term. Josephine and Linda huddled in front of the painted wooden sign for Middleton Ferris County Primary School in Oxfordshire. They were wearing grey pinafore dresses, ankle socks, squeaky new shoes. As they linked arms, 10-year-old best friends forever, they dreamed of wonderful things, although the dreams weren't fully formed yet. It's our last year. We can't have old Thomas again. Lindy's small face was puckered. I hate his guts. He caned Sally Corbin because she didn't know the 7 times table. And she wears calipers. He's horrible. Josie shuddered. I always feel sick on Mondays. I hate sing-along on Monday with that posh woman on the radio with a warbling voice. It's even worse when Terrible Thomas cracks the cane and shouts, "Sing, you buggers, or I'll make you sing." Lindy sniffed, swishing her glossy ponytail. His face goes all red. Josie said he's the worst teacher in the school. He's so bossy. He made me dance with Jimmy Baker in country dancing. Jimmy Baker stinks. Lindy pinched her nose to show how bad the smell was. Jimmy is a sweaty stink bomb, Josie agreed. Old Thomas made me dance with George Lepre, and he smells just like the pigs on his dad's farm. Virgil Toomey says he sleeps with the pigs, but I don't believe him. I wish I could dance with a nice boy when we do country dancing, Lindy said dreamily. Who do you think is the handsomest boy in the class? Josie asked, grasping her friend's hand. Neil Timms. He's gorgeous. He has come-to-bed eyes. Lindy sighed, blushing. I don't know what come-to-bed eyes are, but his eyes are really nice. He has curly eyelashes. It's certainly not Dickie Edwards. A slim girl with long, unruly hair joined them, her face bright with mischief. I knocked his front tooth out in the wreck when he tried to bully our Tina. It hasn't improved his ugly face one bit. I wish I was as brave as you, Minnie, Josie said, linking her arm through Minnie Moore's. Or as clever. Lindy linked the other arm. You'll go off to the grammar next year and leave us behind at the secondary modern. My dad says I can't go. Minnie spat on the ground and rubbed it into the tarmac with her plimsoll. He says it's a waste of money for a girl. She shrugged. I don't care. I'll go anyway. Even Terrible Thomas said you're exceptionally bright, Josie said. I am, but I'm not singing Shenandoah again, whether old Thomas is our teacher or not. Minnie frowned. He can cane me all he likes, and I'm going to tell him to stop caning Kenny Hooper and making him cry. It's not fair. Oh, Kenny. Lindy pulled a face. He's weird. He's not weird. He just sees things differently, Minnie said, picking at the threads of her second-hand pinafore dress. One day people will say he's a genius, she sighed. I hope they have some new books on the library shelf. I read all the famous 5 books 3 times last year. Can't they get some Greek myths or some Shakespeare? An infant's teacher came out into the playground, a woman in a long skirt, her hair in a roll, to clang a handbell loudly. We'd better go in, Josie murmured. Then we'll find out who our teacher is." "I hope it's someone who can teach," Minnie grumbled. "Someone who won't keep making us bloody sing or dance with silly boys. I tell everyone Fergal Toomey's my country dancing partner because he doesn't come to school half the time and I get to sit out and read." "I hope we get someone who can keep Dickie Edwards under control." Lindy cringed at the thought. "He scares me a bit, to be honest." "He doesn't scare me. We stick together." Minnie pulled a face. "That's how it's going to be. I don't care about old Thomas and Dickie Edwards and smelly Jimmy Baker. We'll make this the best year yet." The three friends walked through the door marked girls. They crossed the hall that always stank of stewed cabbage, sweet pink custard and sweaty plimsolls. It smelled different today. A sharp whiff of too much polish and disinfectant. They made their way towards the classroom, taking their seats one behind the other. Most children were already there. Minnie went to sit at the front. She twisted round and winked as Lindy and Josie took the desks behind. Kenny Hooper sat down with a thump, looking around nervously. Dickie Edwards flopped behind him and flicked Kenny's ears, causing him to yelp. Then they heard the clack of heels, and a new teacher walked into the room. The class was quiet, studying the calm woman who stood before them. She wore a fitted blue dress with a swirling skirt and blue shoes with pointed toes. Her hair fell in blonde waves to her shoulders. Her fingernails and lips were painted red. She looked like a film star. She smiled, and when she spoke, her voice was blanket soft. "My name is Miss Hamilton. I'm your teacher for this year." Someone sighed. It could have been relief that she wasn't Mr. Thomas, or it could have been love. Miss Hamilton glanced around the room. "So I thought we'd start off today by getting to know each other, and the best way to do that is to sing." Minnie groaned. Sally Corbin visibly shuddered, heaving her calipered legs into a safer position. Miss Hamilton moved behind her desk and reached for a large case, taking out a shiny acoustic guitar. She strummed a chord once, twice, and turned to the class with a smile, as Dickie Edwards made a hollow sound from his backside, a low farting noise that rippled against the chair. Jimmy Baker laughed loudly, and Kenny Hooper waved a hand in front of his face and yelled, "Miss, he stings! He did that on purpose!" The class held their breath as one, watching the new teacher. She smiled again, placing the guitar safely against her seat, and walked towards Dickie, skirt swishing, heels clacking. She leaned over the desk, her red-nailed fingers taking Dickie gently by the ear, and she whispered, "Do you have a medical problem you'd like to tell me about, young man?" Dickie's cheeks were burning. He stammered, "No, miss." "Then let's see if you can sing as well as you blow the trumpet, shall we?" Miss Hamilton held his earlobe for a moment longer, sashayed back to her seat, and picked up the guitar. Minnie Moore mouthed across the classroom to Josie and Lindy, "Not bloody Shenandoah." Miss Hamilton was already strumming the chords to Buddy Holly's "That'll Be the Day," and every member of the class sat up straight. Then 44 faces smiled as one and joined in with the teacher, whose strong voice carried to the back of the class. They sang "Wake Up, Little Susie" and "Peggy Sue." Miss Hamilton even let them clap their hands in time as they boomed "Jailhouse Rock" as loud as they could. Georgie Ledbury, the farmer's son, waved an arm in the air. "Can we sing some Chuck Berry songs, miss? He's my favourite." They sang "Maybelline" at the top of their voices. Kenny Hooper was louder than everyone. Then Miss Hamilton put her guitar down and smiled. "Thank you, class. That was delightful." Josie gasped and Lindy turned round wide-eyed. No one had called them delightful before. Mr. Thomas never said thank you. Miss Hamilton scanned the room, her eyes falling on an empty desk. "Who's missing?" "Fergal Toomey, miss," Minnie piped up. "His family are bargees," Jimmy called out. "They live on the barge down on the Charwell. He'll have gone rabbiting with his dad." "They're Irish, miss," Dickie added, in an attempt to endear himself with new information to this beautiful young teacher. "He don't come to school much." Miss Hamilton faced the class, her eyes bright. "I see. Right, so now we've warmed up, I'll take the register. Then let's do half an hour of arithmetic. We'll get those times tables perfect, and then we'll learn about some of the most incredible countries in the world. After that, we'll be ready for playtime, and we'll have earned our bottles of milk." The day passed in a swirl, and by 3 o'clock every member of the class was in love with Miss Hamilton, even Dickie Edwards, who collected the exercise books and put them away. Then Miss Hamilton took out a copy of The Wind in the Willows and said, "Right, class, make yourselves as comfortable as possible, please. It's story time." Dickie and Jimmy both laid shorn heads on their arms. Minnie closed her eyes blissfully. Kenny Hooper's crumpled face was suddenly calm. Josie and Lindy leaned against the wall next to the belting radiators that made the room smell warm, the toasting scent of washing powder on their jumpers. Miss Hamilton began to read a story about several animals, a mole, a rat, a stubborn, proud toad, and an elusive badger. And the children dreamed of a land where animals could talk, where they were friends and had adventures. Miss Hamilton read clearly, her voice comforting, and all around the classroom eyelids grew heavy, faces puckered with smiles, as everyone drifted into a wonderful world of imagination and hope, where friendship was everything. The lesson they learned that day would bind them for life. The year passed too quickly, and finally the summer term came. Every pupil, even Fergal Toomey, arrived at school each day, eager to learn. Minnie Moore passed the 11+, and Miss Hamilton visited her home, telling her father that his child had an exceptional intellect, and the grammar school was the right place for her. Mr. Moore grudgingly relented, saying sullenly that his daughter would get ideas above her station, go off to do some highfalutin pointless job, marry a toff, and never pay her father a penny back. On the last day of term, Miss Hamilton accompanied them into the dining hall at lunch to share a feast she'd brought, sandwiches, cake, lemonade. She told them how important it was to give and receive. The ancient Greek playwright Euripides told us, "Friends show their love in times of trouble," Miss Hamilton said. "So we share lunch as friends." She gave each pupil a notebook inscribed, "A good friend is like a 4-leaf clover, hard to find and lucky to have." Then she said, "So, before we all go, and I wish you all so much happiness, I want each of you to tell me what you hope for most in the future. What do you want to do with your unique lives?" Dickie shot up his hand. "I want to drink beer, miss." "I want to sing like Chuck Berry and have a big tractor like my dad's," George said with a grin. Neil? "I want to fix cars, miss, and I want to drive a brand new car, like a frog-eyed sprite." "That's nice." "Fergal?" Miss Hamilton prompted. "I live on our barge," Fergal shrugged, gazing towards the open door. "And I wish you happiness." "Josephine?" "I want to own a nice house in Middleton, Ferris, and travel and see the world." "I'm sure you will." "Linda?" "I want to live happily ever after and be really good at cooking." "Lovely," Miss Hamilton smiled. Minnie? I'll learn everything there is to know and live in a big house filled with books. Miss Hamilton nodded knowingly, and Dickie groaned. Sally put up her hand. Miss, even though my legs won't go fast, I'm going to travel miles away on an aeroplane. That's an excellent answer, Sally. And Kenny? Miss Hamilton smiled sweetly. What do you hope for? Kenny thought for a moment, then he said, I want to stay here with you in your class, miss. I ain't bothered about no big school. I'm safe here. My gran says growing old is painful, so I'm going to stay 11 forever. How wise, Kenny. Miss Hamilton's voice was filled with affection. If only we could stay as we are. But grow older we must, and we must all move forward with our lives. And on that note, I wish you happiness and friendship. You have been a wonderful class, and I'll remember you all, even when I'm an old lady. So, don't forget, laugh together, share lunch together, and take care of each other, whatever comes along. Now, off you go, class, into the rest of your lives. And good luck. Chapter 2. Josie Sanderson stretched out on the double bed in the cabin of the cruise ship, her eyes closed, thinking about her school days. It seemed such a long time ago. So many things had happened, some good, some not so good. As Kenny had said, growing older was definitely painful. Josie was 74 years old, and here she was, cruising around the Caribbean. She should be happy. As a child, she dreamed of travelling to such places. On board there were shows, dinners, games for single passengers, and now she was going on deck for a cocktail, wearing a swimsuit and sarong against the afternoon heat. As she gazed at her reflection in the mirror, she pulled back her shoulders and smiled, trying to look cheerful. The real problem, the painful bit, was that now she had no Harry to tell her how gorgeous she looked. He would have kissed her shoulder and said that she was lovely. He should be here with her now, sharing the sights and the sounds of the Caribbean islands, especially today. It wasn't the same anniversary celebration on her own. They'd been talking about the cruise for years. She was determined to enjoy everything promised in the brochure. In the last 5 days, she'd experienced idyllic Barbados and the rhythms of Jamaica. She'd had cocktails, joined in competitions, karaoke and cookery, shows and gala dinners. Harry would have loved it. It had been his idea. Josie would be back in Middleton Ferris before long. She was determined to make the most of her holiday. She pushed her sunglasses firmly on her nose, tugged on the floppy sun hat, locked the cabin and sauntered along a corridor. Her sarong swishing, she walked up a small flight of steps. The heat on deck hit her immediately. She paused to fan her face with her hand and bumped into Mr. and Mrs. Wisner, a friendly American couple whom she'd met at dinner. Mrs. Wisner smiled warmly. Mrs. Sanderson, Josie, how nice to see you again. Josie liked her married name. She loved sharing everything with Harry. Besides, she hadn't been Josephine Potter for 50 years. Any mention of Harry still gave her a glow of pleasure. Nice to see you both. Arnie suggested that we head back to the cabin. Nancy beamed. It's too warm on deck. Arnie gave a little cough. Nancy loves the sunshine, but her skin burns. I used to be able to sit outside all day when I was young, but now I just turn the colour of a lobster. Nancy waved a hand, dismissing the problem. Will we see you for dinner again tonight? There's a pianist and a band. And we love to waltz, Arnie beamed, hooking an arm through his wife's. We're going to the cabin for a siesta now, then we'll be raring to go again. It takes it out of you, all that heat and dancing until midnight. Nancy agreed. My Arnie still cuts a dashing figure on the dance floor. Josie peered through the gap between them. She could see the deck chairs, the white rails, and beyond, the sea sparkling, almost blinding in the sunlight. She said, I'm going up on deck with a cocktail. Nancy clasped her hands. I recommend the margarita. It's just so refreshing. Margarita it is, then, Josie agreed. Enjoy, Arnie called as he propelled his wife forwards towards the steps. Josie watched them go. They were a sweet couple, still in love, making the most of their later years together. For a moment she envied them. She found a cluster of loungers away from the others. She'd read a while and enjoy the sunshine and the whisper of the waves. Josie arranged herself on a deck chair and reached into her bag for a book, a romance set in a cute animal rescue centre. She'd had a fondness for books about animals since her last year at primary school. She opened the page, stretching her legs. It was quiet. There was no one else on deck, apart from a man wearing a Panama hat and a colourful shirt, who was gazing into the sea. She'd noticed him yesterday and the day before at the singles games. He'd looked awkward, and he hadn't joined in. The sun on her face felt good. Even behind the shades, the glare of the rays filtered through. A voice from above murmured, Would you like to order a drink, madam? The waiter, in dazzling white, a dicky bird at his throat, smiled. Josie wriggled upright. A margarita would be nice. Coming up, he replied easily, and walked away. She read half a page, and he was back, handing her a glass of pale liquid, a slice of lime perched on the side. She took a sip before smacking her lips. Thank you. The waiter hovered. Will there be anything else? Josie held up the glass. I might have another later on. The waiter inclined his head and moved away. Josie picked up her book again, finding the page, reading the first few lines. Her eyes drifted to the man in the Panama hat and bright shirt, standing by the railings. He leaned over as if to inspect a fish in the sea. Then he slumped forward, lolling over the railings, flopping like a rag doll. He didn't move. Josie wondered if he was ill. He didn't look well. She stood up slowly and marched over. Are you all right? The man didn't seem to hear. He stared into the sea. She laid a hand on his shoulder. Can I help? He raised his head to blink at her, his hat askew, and she was astonished to see that his face was covered in tears. No, I'm sorry, no. He took a breath. I'm fine. He clearly wasn't fine. His whole body was trembling. Josie took in the jazzy shirt, the lilt of his voice, Welsh probably. Why don't you come and sit down with me for a moment? Get your bearings. The man pushed himself upright, his knuckles white against the railings. I shouldn't have come on this cruise. Well, you're here now. Josie didn't know what to say, but she was blurting the first thing that came into her head. Can I get you a margarita? They're lovely. The man stared at her for a moment, and she said, I'm Josie. She grasped his elbow, leading him to the loungers, guiding him to the seat next to hers. Thank you. He eased himself down, adjusting pale shorts over paler legs. I'm so sorry. He was still shaking. I'm David Ellis. He took off his hat, wiping a hand over his damp forehead. Yes, please. I think I might join you in one of those. Margarita, is it? Josie nodded. The waiter was hovering, and she ordered another cocktail. Then she put a gentle hand on his arm. Do you feel better?" "Yes. No, I don't know," David muttered. "I've been so silly, coming here by myself." Josie's eyes were full of sympathy. "It's hard when you're on your own." "Are you alone?" "I am," Josie smiled bravely. "I'm here for the glorious sunshine." David turned to her, bright blue eyes and a blank face. "It's too hot for me. I'd be better off on a Baltic cruise." "Why did you choose the Caribbean?" Josie frowned behind her sunglasses. "Research, I'd hoped," David muttered. "I'm writing a crime book set on the islands. I thought it would be good for me." "But it isn't." Josie watched his face carefully to check if he was recovering. "Good for you?" "A fortnight's a long time by yourself on a boat." The waiter had arrived with the cocktail. David took it in trembling fingers and sipped eagerly. "I thought it would help me get over my problems, but it's made them worse." Josie attempted to approach the conversation from a different angle. "You're a writer?" "I'm not published yet," David admitted. "I've been trying to write for years. You don't think 70 is too old to be an author, do you?" "You can do anything if you set your mind to it." Josie met his eyes. "You seem a determined woman," David nodded. "I admire your pluck." "What makes you say that?" Josie asked. "You're on a cruise by yourself. You're very sociable." She was momentarily taken aback. "Sociable?" David was alarmed. "Oh, no, sorry, I didn't mean to be rude. No, what I mean is, I admire how you have the courage to enjoy your own company. I'm grieving, and I thought it would bring me out of myself being here, but it's made me feel worse." Josie touched his hand. "Do you want to talk about it?" "My partner died last year. He always wanted to go on a Caribbean cruise, but we never got round to it, so I'm here by myself." Josie understood too well the effort it took to do things by herself nowadays. For a moment she was lost in thought. David brought the drink to his lips again and said, "Alan and I were together for 35 years. We lived in Aberystwyth. We always said we'd take this cruise, but we kept putting it off." "I'm sorry." Josie gave David her full attention. "So your ambition is to write a novel?" "It is." He smiled, and Josie noticed how his eyes shone with tears. "I'm going to make my hero a gay Welsh detective by the name of Alan. He's going to be a handsome, gallant man with spectacles and a sharp intellect, just like my own Alan was." He gulped the margarita. "Tell me about yourself. Why, you're here," he grinned. "We're all looking for something." "I'm as fine as I can be." She noticed David inspecting her wedding ring. "I promised myself this trip. Tomorrow we're doing," she recalled the brochure, "the Calypso of Trinidad and the stunning scenery of St. Lucia." She held up her glass. "I promised myself I'd celebrate." "Oh, I agree." David clinked his glass against Josie's, although his face was sad. "It's just tough by yourself." Josie thought he might cry again. She was tempted to stretch out her hand and squeeze his fingers. Instead, she said, "Our loved ones would want us to enjoy the rest of our time for their sakes. I'm not a believer in giving up, David, although it would be so easy." "It would. I've been feeling like I don't want to try anymore. I'm too tired." "But we won't give up, will we?" Josie clutched the stem of her glass. We owe it to them. You write your book, make your hero the best you can, based on your beloved Alan, and have a glorious time on the cruise. For him. For yourself. David nodded. I will try. Thank you, Josie. You really are an inspiration. She shook her head. I'm doing my best. It hasn't always been easy. Why? David met her eyes. You've lost someone special too, have you? I have. I'm sorry. Josie felt the familiar mist of tears cloud her vision, and she blinked hard. My husband, Harry. This is our anniversary cruise. She drained her glass. He died a year ago. I'm here because he wanted it so much. I won't let him down. I'm celebrating for us both. That's wonderful, David sighed. It's a lovely thing to do. I think so. Josie composed her face. And I'm determined to have the best time. I'm thanking him each moment for the precious years we had together. She swallowed. This cruise is mine and Harry's. It's just that there's only me here. Oh, that's so true, David agreed. And I'm here for Alan, the love of my life. He was thoughtful, gazing at his almost empty glass. Then he said, Josie, I don't suppose... She adjusted her sunglasses. Suppose what? He took a breath. Would you have dinner at the same table as me tonight, and we can order a bottle of champagne, and you can tell me all about Harry and the best times you shared? Josie smiled. I don't see why not. And you wouldn't mind if I told a few tales about my Alan and the larks we had over the years? I'd love to hear about them, Josie said. That way we can bring both of them here with us on the cruise. Josie smiled. I always keep Harry with me. He's in my thoughts every moment. Alan loved to dance. David's eyes gleamed. I wonder, do you like dancing? I've had 2 left feet since country dancing at primary school. Josie was suddenly enthusiastic. But Harry was a fabulous dancer. He could put a few moves together. Then we'll dance tonight after dinner, for them, David suggested. And for ourselves, Josie added. Do you know today is our 50th anniversary? Mine and Harry's. David leaned forward. That's awesome. So, Josie, tonight. He took a breath. You put on your glad rags. I'll put on my best bib and tucker, and we'll celebrate with champagne. We will. Josie reached out and patted his arm. We'll have a real party. Thanks so much, Josie. Really. You've no idea how much I needed a friend right now. David's eyes shone. I've just spent the last hour staring into the deep water, wondering what my life was all about, thinking I'd never write that novel, not with Alan gone. But now... Now? Josie met his eyes. The sun is shining. Let's make the most of it. That's what they'd want for us. I know it. You're totally right. David looked around for the waiter, calling out, Excuse me, could I have 2 more margaritas, please? Life's too short to settle for just the one. Chapter 3. Smoke billowed from the oven, filling the kitchen with the stench of burned cheese. The lasagna was charcoal black. Lynn's reading glasses steamed up as she stared at the recipe book and saw nothing but fog for a few moments. She placed the porcelain dish on top of the cooker and stared at her hands, small inside the oven gloves. Oh, dear. Her vision cleared a little. The burned topping had leaked over the side of the dish and stuck, brittle. She took a pace back, stared at the lasagna and said it again. "Oh, dear." For a while she didn't know what to do except to inhale the harsh smell of spoiled food. She put the oven gloves down next to the burnt lasagna. "It's ruined." She grabbed a handful of her hair and sniffed it. Burned cheese. Her clothes smelled of it too. Blue smoke hung in the light from the window. Lynn took her glasses off and glanced at the wall clock. It was 5 to 7. Neil would be home at 7 on the dot. He was Mr. Reliable, and she'd promised him a birthday meal to remember. This year, Lynn had been determined to cook something nice. Her exact words were, "I'll make you a meal to remember." Her friend Josie was on a cruise trip to the Caribbean. She was a widow now, and it reminded Lynn that her husband was special. He deserved spoiling. "I'll cook Italian and we'll have a romantic evening together," she'd promised. "You go and have a nice stroll in the woods, stretch your legs, and I'll make you the genuine taste of Italy." That's what it says in the cookery book. The tiramisu was a disaster. She had tried her best to follow the recipe, but she had added too much coffee. She couldn't offer it for dessert. It was like mud. A raspberry yoghurt from the fridge would have to do. The starter was supposed to be antipasti, boiled eggs and slices of meat. But she forgot to buy sourdough bread for the bruschetta. So she'd buttered thick triangles of white sliced loaf, and they didn't look right. The eggs were undercooked, all jellied whites and runny yolks, and she'd fried the prosciutto ham by mistake. It looked like toenail clippings. The problem had always been the same. Lynn couldn't cook. She had no talent for it. Long before the arthritis in her fingers kept her awake at night, she'd never been able to make a decent meal from scratch. It was a standing joke since she and Neil married. He'd either have to live off ready meals or learn to cook himself. He was a good cook now, but 49 years of marriage hadn't improved Lynn's skills at all. Neil was the best of husbands. He never complained. He told her every day he loved her. Their marriage was perfect except for the fact that she was the worst cook in the world. And in the grand scale of things, he said, that wasn't important. Lynn left the smelly kitchen behind her and drifted to the lounge, peering through the window. Neil was parking the Charan in the drive. He glanced towards the window, grinning, waving. Lynn waved back. Her eyes fell upon the 2 wedding photos that had been on the window ledge for many years. In one photo, Lynn wore a cream dress, her hair loose beneath a veil, and Neil was smiling in a smart suit as they cut a 2-tiered cake. The second picture showed them both holding hands in front of their beloved sports car, a green, frog-eyed sprite, while colourful confetti floated in the air above them. Lynn smiled. She'd married the most handsome boy in primary school 49 years ago, and they'd been happy ever since. He was her soulmate, her best friend. Neil stood in the doorway, pulling off his jacket and cap. His hair was paler now, but he had the same easy smile, twinkling eyes, long curly lashes. He wrapped his arms around her. "What's that gorgeous smell? Is it my dinner?" Lynn pecked his lips, then pushed him away. "You're teasing me. It's burnt to a cinder." He shrugged. "I like my food well done." "Charred?" Lynn was horrified. "I've ruined your birthday meal." Neil took her hand, tugging her towards the kitchen. "It'll be all right. With ketchup." "It won't be," Lynn wailed. They reached the kitchen and were both staring at the incinerated lasagna. Neil joked, I've had worse. I promised you a taste of Italy, and all you have is a taste of something really disgusting. I'll have to throw it in the bin. It doesn't matter. Life's been good to us. Neil wrapped an arm around her shoulders. When we were first married, we were poor as church mice. We had burnt toast and stew 3 times a week. And my stew was like sludge, Lynn smiled, remembering. You just started working in the garage, and we were so poor. I'll never forget our 10th anniversary. You sold the frog-eyed sprite and bought me this. It was such a nice surprise. She held out a finger, showing a small eternity ring. Lynn sighed. Her fingers had been tapered and elegant then. Now the arthritis had twisted them a little. I thought you'd guessed. Neil brought her fingers to his lips. I've always been rubbish at keeping secrets. You have an honest face. Lynn pecked his cheek. But what are we going to eat? It's your birthday and I've ruined dinner. I have an idea. His arms were around her. Let's go down the Sun, shall we? They'll have a carvery. But it's your birthday, Lynn gasped. And I'll have an evening out with the most beautiful wife in the whole of Oxfordshire. I so wish I could cook. Neil kissed her nose. Come on, Lindy. Let's live a little. It's not every day that a man is 74. Lynn sighed again. Poor Harry, he was only in his early 70s. And now Josie's taken herself off on a Caribbean cruise for one. I don't know how she can do it. She'll be back soon. She'll tell you all about the fun she had. I worry about her, Lynn said. I worry about everything. He stopped her words with a kiss. Don't worry today. It's my birthday. Now go and put on something nice. And that perfume that makes me want to chase you round the sofa. Neil winked, his face mischievous. Let's have a nice roast dinner and a sticky toffee pudding. Well, Lynn was unsure. Lindy? He stared into her eyes. I'm the luckiest man in the world. I remind myself of that every day. Go on, get yourself ready, and I'll give Dickie Jr. a ring and reserve the table near the window. Lynn remembered the lasagna. What about the spoiled food? There's a vixen with cubs in the field beyond the garden. I'm sure they'd all love a taste of Italy. Neil winked. And what they can't eat, the blue tits will finish. If the blackened cheese doesn't stick their beaks together. Lynn hesitated. Then she grinned. A night out with my handsome husband would be great, though. There's no accounting for taste. Neil laughed. I always thought Jimmy Baker was the one the girls liked. Poor Jimmy. He was so smelly, and we treated him so badly. He's widowed now, and Sally Corbyn's moved to Australia. Kenny Hooper's always been on his own. Lynn was suddenly sad. There aren't many of us from Miss Hamilton's class left. Neil agreed. I like Kenny. He helped me out at the garage when I needed another pair of hands. He's a genius with fixing clutches. And he's a good lad. Jimmy, too. Lynn was still thinking. It seemed so long since she and Josie were at school. Everyone was so much older now. Yet time had passed so quickly and she felt no different. It didn't make sense. Neil guessed her thoughts. Don't worry about us, Lindy. Your cooking keeps us strong. We have the constitutions of oxen. He winked again. Unless we die of starvation. Come on, let's get going. Lynn was about to move, then she paused, threw her arms around Neil and kissed his lips. He was momentarily taken aback. What was that for? Not that I'm complaining. Because you're the best, she gave a little shrug. And because it's your birthday and I'm so lucky." A sob caught in her throat. She was far too emotional nowadays. She blamed it on the tablet she took for the arthritis. Neil was grinning. "The black dress is my favourite. The one with the neckline." He squeezed her arm. "Go on, get changed. I'll book a table for 8 o'clock. Lynn mouthed, "Love you." Then she was on her way upstairs to the shower. There was some spicy shower gel and a coconut shampoo. It might just get rid of the smell of burnt lasagna. Josie had chosen her favourite black dress. She sat across the table from David Ellis, who was dapper in a dinner jacket, and Arnie and Nancy Wisner, clad in matching white. A band played swing music, although the dance floor was currently empty. Arnie poured from a bottle of champagne as the group talked and laughed. Nancy leaned towards David. "So, you guys only met just this afternoon?" "We did, yes," David replied. "We shared cocktails on deck. Josie and I had a great time talking about life and things." He glanced in Josie's direction, a little nervous about what to say. Josie helped him out. "David is a writer. He's researching a detective novel." "I have a title," David proclaimed. "What do you think of Murder in Sweet St. Lucia?" Arnie pulled a face. "Is it a horror?" "More of a mystery," David replied. "You might make the title about Alan, his role as a detective," Josie suggested. "Oh, I just love thrillers and crime novels." Nancy fanned herself with her hand. "As long as they aren't about real-life crime, which scares me witless, and I adore novels set in the Caribbean." "May I make a toast?" Josie raised her glass. "It's a special occasion for me. My husband and I are celebrating our 50th wedding anniversary." "Oh, that's so nice." Nancy was puzzled. "But where is he?" Josie's face was calm. "He died not long ago. This was our dream trip. I wanted to come here for him." "Oh, Josie, that's so brave of you," Nancy breathed. "Then, of course, we must remember him," Arnie added. He raised his glass. "To Josie and—" "Harry," Josie said, her voice strong. "Harry," came a chorus of 3 voices. Then Josie added, "And to Alan, David's partner, who is also sadly missed. May they live in our hearts forever." "Forever," David wiped away a tear. The band launched into Ain't Misbehavin'. Several couples sauntered to the centre of the room and began to dance. Then Josie stood up. "We should dance too." She held a hand out towards David. "I'd love to." David was on his feet, sweeping Josie into his arms. As they swirled across the dance floor, he whispered, "Thanks for this evening, Josie. I think you might just have saved my life." Nancy was in Arnie's arms, and they were gazing into each other's eyes as they swayed. Then Nancy leaned across to Josie and murmured, "This is quite a workout." Her voice was a conspiratorial whisper. "Tonight, it's champagne and dancing with new friends until gone midnight. Let's show all the youngsters around here that we Golden Oldies still have what it takes, eh?" Chapter 4. Josie arrived at the Willows in Middleton Ferris, well past 1 o'clock, falling onto the welcome warmth of her own bed, the one she'd shared with Harry until not so long ago. The Caribbean cruise had been relaxing, but the journey home was exhausting. She closed her eyes. Sleep wouldn't come easily. Images of the holiday flashed back like snapshots. The white sands and crystal seas of Jamaica, the green tapered mountains of St. Lucia, the honey sunsets and the shared evenings with David and the Wisners. She'd had a fabulous time, returning bronzed, with a phone camera full of memories. Josie rolled over in the familiar bed, feeling troubled. The holiday was over now. There was nothing left to cling to but the certainty that she was a widow for the rest of her days. At 74, her life wasn't over. She'd told David as much, as he'd whispered to her on the dance floor that his loneliness had been bone deep, and he'd thought of hurling himself in the ocean. Josie understood loneliness. She couldn't allow it to define her life, but she had no intention of replacing Harry. She'd never love anyone else. Now she needed to find herself all over again, the newly single Josie Sanderson. But after a glorious marriage and years of shared love, the rest of her life was going to need some thought. Josie woke after 11 o'clock to gaze into Harry's eyes. The photos smiled back at her from the bedside table, and her heart was warmed by the familiar grin. "Good morning, gorgeous." She kissed her fingers and placed them tenderly on Harry's lips. Then she paused. Someone was banging at the door downstairs. She struggled into a dressing gown and shuffled towards the stairs, bleary-eyed and barefoot. The door opened to a blindingly bright April morning, and Lynn Timms was standing on the step with her arms out for a hug, clutching a packet of chocolate chip cookies. "Welcome back." "Come in." Josie tugged her friend inside towards the kitchen. "I'll put the kettle on." "You look fabulous." They were both speaking at once. "It was wonderful," Josie said, just as Lynn asked, "How was the cruise?" They stopped, both laughing, and Josie said, "How was Neil's birthday?" "A total success. We ate out at the Sun. The sticky toffee pudding was to die for." Lynn pulled a face. "I incinerated the lasagna. How on earth does Nigella do it, every meal so sexy and delicious?" She shook her head. "So, the cruise, Josie. Tell me everything." Josie was pouring tea into cups. "It was fantastic. The Caribbean is incredible. The sunshine, the beaches, it must have been stunning." Lynn was imagining herself there. "Weren't you lonely, Josie?" "I met a fantastic American couple, Arnie and Nancy. I promised we'd stay in touch. And a lovely man called David from Wales." Lynn caught her breath. "You met a man?" "He's a writer, my age, widowed, gay." Josie picked up her cup. "He was good company and he could dance." Lynn nodded, as if she understood. Then Josie clapped her hands excitedly. "I bought you something." She placed a bag in front of her friend. "The stuff in the tissue paper is yours. The Angostura bitters are for Neil." Lynn dived in, unwrapping a silver bracelet. "Oh, I love it." She tore the paper from her book, and her face betrayed her terror. "A recipe book? Tastes of the Caribbean?" "We'll have some Caribbean nights in the summer. It'll be fun." "Not if I'm cooking, Josie." Lynn threw her arms around her friend. "But thanks so much." "Yes, we'll cook up a storm and dance in the garden. Oh, I can't wait to hear all about your holiday." Josie reached out a hand, patting Lynn's. "I adopted a turtle while I was out there, and I brought enough rum back to last us ages. Not that Harry liked rum much." She paused, closing her eyes. Lynn hesitated. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." Josie took a breath. "More than fine. When are we next doing lunch with Minnie?" "The Silver Lady's lunch. I came round so that we could double-check the dates. I think it's this Saturday at O'Deal's Cafe. Neil's going for a hike in Old Scratch's woods." "I love that you call us Silver Ladies," Josie said. "It makes me feel like we're a special group." We're strong women of a certain age. There's a dignity to the name. I hate getting older. There's so much prejudice about ageing, and so many problems. Lynn looked at her fingers. They were stiff and sore this morning. I don't mind getting older. I just miss Harry. Josie exhaled. Minnie couldn't care less about how old she is. If anyone says anything to her, she tears into them. I remember her telling a kid off who called her a crone in the street. What did she say? Crone means witch-like woman, so I'm going to curse you. Then she shouted something in Latin that sounded like it had come from Harry Potter. It will be nice to see Minnie again. Josie cupped her hands around the mug of tea. I wonder what she's been up to. Last time we did lunch, we had all that terrible weather. We went to the pub outside Charbury. She almost started a fight. Josie smiled. The man in the bar was making racist comments at the football on the TV screen. Minnie was amazing. Lynn put on an aristocratic voice. She said, "If you insist on using outdated language, young man, then I'd appreciate it if you'd take it outside in the rain. Such terminology belongs in the gutter." Then she told the publican to throw him out. Everyone in the bar was on her side, though. Josie sighed. I wish I had Minnie's courage. And her beautiful house in Oxford. She's done so well. She has, Lynn. Josie pulled a face. Is she still dating the maths professor? Didn't she dump him for the archaeologist last year? I can't keep track of Minnie's love life. No one can. Josie lifted her cup. Another cup? Oh, yes, please. Lynn picked up the packet of cookies from the table. And let's make a start on these. An hour later, Lynn was strolling home from Josie's house back to Barn Park. She wondered if she should stop in the Co-op and buy a pizza for Neil's tea. Then she recalled he'd promised to cook. She passed Chandos, Gerald Harris's large bungalow, not far from the recreation ground. He was outside pruning roses in his immaculate garden. He waved and called out, all strangled vowels, "Good morning, Linda." "Morning, Gerald." Linda pressed her lips together. She'd almost said, "Morning Bomber," by mistake. His local nickname was predictably Bomber Harris. He'd been in the RAF and had retired to Middleton Ferris as a widower 3 years ago. There was a lot of gossip about him in the village. Locals often commented on his tendency to grumble about others. What did Jimmy Baker once say about him in the Sun Inn? He'd sell his own mother for a glass of scotch. He's the sort of bloke you'd turn your back on and expect to be stabbed in it. Lynn knew he was just lonely. But people in Middleton Ferris liked to gossip, especially Jimmy and Dickie when they got together in the pub. She continued her walk past the recreation ground. The sun was out and the swings and roundabouts gleamed. A lone woman was there with a child in a pushchair. The rec hadn't changed much in 60 years, although the rides had been replaced by safer, smarter ones. She'd spent so much time on a swing as a toddler in the early 1950s. She recalled the old slide with the hump halfway down, an iron monster with the words Kettering forged in metal on the steps. She, Josie, Minnie and Tina had been playing on it one day when they'd been 8 years old, sliding down at speed, pretending they were Alice in Wonderland disappearing down the rabbit hole. Lynn had been thin then. She had come down over the hump too fast, shot off the end and landed on her backside in a muddy puddle. She'd burst into tears, and Dickie Edwards had been riding his bike with friends, and he'd laughed at her, calling her Skinny Linny, telling everyone she'd pooed her pants. Josie had shouted at him to shut his cake hole, and Minnie had waved her fist, causing him to ride off, the girls' shouts of derision ringing in his ears. Lynn smiled. They were good days, a lifetime ago. She arrived at Odille's cafe feeling the cold. The chilly March wind had filtered through her anorak, and her arthritis had started to play up. She pushed the door open. The immediate warmth comforted her like a hug. Odile looked up from wiping tables and grinned. Dangerous Dave Dawson from the garage was hunched over a plate of sausage and chips. He called out, "Hello, Len. How's Neil?" "Fine. He's upstairs on the laptop in the box room, staring at pictures of old cars." Dangerous Dave continued chewing the sausage. He had egg yolk around his mouth. "Tell him to call into the garage soon. I bet he misses the old place." "I think he does sometimes." Lynn sat down at a clean table. Dangerous Dave had been called dangerous long before he had taken over Neil Timms's garage, because he was always having accidents. She smiled. He'd probably been called dangerous since childhood. "We were glad to sell you the garage, though. It's our time now." "As long as Neil's enjoying himself," Dangerous Dave said. "Business is good." He licked his lips. "I'm on my lunch break." He winked as if making an excuse for not being at work. Then Odile was at Lynn's shoulder, her round face smiling. "Hello, Lynn. Chilly day today, isn't it? What will you have?" "A nice hot cuppa." Lynn rubbed her hands in anticipation. "Coming up. Florence will be with you straight away." Odile's rolling hips swayed towards the entrance to the kitchen, the doorway festooned with colourful plastic strips, and she disappeared into the back of the cafe. Dangerous Dave winked. "Florence loves working here. Best move she made. She wasn't cut out to be my assistant at the garage." He shoveled fried bread into his mouth. "It's too quiet in the village, though. No life for a 22-year-old. I keep telling her she should move somewhere else, have a bit of life, but she loves being here with her old dad." On cue, Florence Dawson arrived with a tray. She moved easily, a slim girl with brown hair tied in a ponytail, a dimpled smile, a flowery dress beneath an apron. She placed a cup of tea in front of Dave. "Here, Dad, get that down you. And then you ought to get back to work." "She bosses me, my princess," Dangerous Dave said to Lynn, his face shining with pride. "Someone has to, Dad." Florence was at Lynn's side, placing milky tea and a cream horn in front of her. "Nice hot cuppa for you, Lynn." "Thanks, Florence." Lynn cupped her stiff hands around the mug and felt immediately comforted. "But I didn't order a pastry." Florence winked, the same kind of expression as her father.